Brothers and sisters, I want to see your hands up now. Let me see your hands. I want everybody to kick up some noise. I want to hear some revolution out there, brothers. I want to hear a little revolution. Brothers and sisters, the time has come for each and every one of you to decide whether you are going to be the problem or whether you are going to be the solution. That's right. You must choose, brothers. You must choose. It takes 5 seconds. 5 seconds of decision. 5 seconds to realize your purpose here on the planet. It takes 5 seconds to realize that it's time to move. It's time to get down with it. Brothers, it's time to testify, and I want to know, are you ready to testify? Are you ready? I give you a testimony. Pick up the jams, motherfucker! Yeah!
When I first met Dave Marsh, he was a rock writer, and I got to meet him at his house, and like one of the first things he said to me was that there was no excuse for writing "Take It Easy."
I connected to Dave because I knew he felt about music the way I felt about it. It was life sustaining.
I mean, he's always had a larger vision about how rock fits into the American experience.
This whole new journalism thing was so new and so exciting, giving credibility to rock, period. And they brought in soul music into that, which was really quite insightful.
Because of his push to see the critical conversation be democratized and inclusive and incredibly diverse, made the field welcome for people like myself.
That Dave has always been vociferously a champion of equal rights in music writing and of viewing music outside of categories formed by the music industry and too often the music press.
It was their love of music that brought them into journalism in music. They were not just reviewing it from the point of view of they like it or they don't like it, but they took it very seriously.
R&B and soul and rock and roll music was so much the center of the cultural conversation in the 60s and 70s. It was central to your existence. And all of Dave's writing, his intensity matched mine as far as how serious we were taking what we were doing.
Just say that Dave is a seminal writer. He's a seminal American writer. And he is not often touted as for the significance that he has as a writer, period.
Hear, hear.
Welcome, everybody, to Music Like Our Lives Depend on It. This is a program presented by the League of Revolutionaries for a New America in conjunction with 100,000 Poets for Change. You can find that information on your screen. And a celebration of the work of Dave Marsh, whose book, Kick Out the Jams, was published August 15th. This is a book which is very much about the way in which art and social change takes place. My name is Lou Rosenbaum. I'm your co-host for Music Like Our Lives Depend on It. I'm a poet. I came to know Dave and his work because of my many years as a bookseller. I met Dave because I've had the honor to meet and the pleasure to appreciate and work with many writers and artists by doing cultural work as a member of the League of Revolutionaries for a New America. My co-host is Adam Gottlieb. He's a songwriter, a band leader of Chicago's Adam Gottlieb and One Love, which is a fusion band serving songs of the revolution. Adam was politicized by participating in young Chicago authors' poetry process known as Louder Than a Bomb. And he's extended that work tremendously in musical endeavors, including their first full album, All of You, and the reggae single, When the People Ride. Daniel Wolfe is the co-editor of Kick Out the Jams. He is a poet. His most recently published work is More Poems About Money, something I'm dying to read because I really want to get more money. No doubt about that. But he's also an amazing cultural historian. Most recently, How to Be an American. But one of my favorites of his books is about Bob Dylan, Woody Guthrie, and the Calumet, Michigan massacre called Grown Up Anger. It brilliantly weaves together themes of music, politics, and history. Lauren Onkey is the director of the Corcoran School of Arts and Design at George Washington University, where she's also a professor of music. She brought a breath of life into NPR when she was senior music director there. And before that, she spent 7 years shaking up the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. She has an extensive academic background as well, but she's never allowed that to interfere with her contributions to cultural work. Danny Alexander. Danny Alexander teaches English at Johnson County Community College in Kansas City, and most recently is the author of Real Love, No Drama, about the life and music of Mary J. Blige. Danny writes about music for many publications, including his insightful blog, Take Them As They Come, and he will, I'm sure, give you that information in the chat as to where you can find it. We would like to start with an opening for all three of you guys. How did you first encounter Dave Marsh's work? Danny, why don't we start with you?
Well, I think a lot like Lauren, I was about 12 or 13 reading Rolling Stone, if I remember right from what she said before. And Dave's voice stood out to me. I had several favorite writers, but Dave's voice stood out to me from the pack because it felt like he was speaking very directly to me. And then and validated sometimes opinions I had. I mean, sometimes I often disagreed with him, but he also validated opinions I had that it didn't seem like anyone else did, especially in the rock critic press. So, introducing that idea that, it was okay to disagree in essence and to stand up for yourself. When I was in college, I saw he could come to campus. I got involved in a speakers group just to bring him in because I was trying to get a friend of mine to bring him in, and she said, well, join the group and you can bring him in. So he came to our campus, he spoke, great talk. He was focused very much on censorship at that time when, the Senate was holding hearings on the evils of music, particularly heavy metal. And well, heavy metal was a big focus in rap. But, we left that first couple of days we spent together. He left me with his phone number. He left me with Leonard Peltier's name, which I was not familiar with. He left me with Fever Gordon's name, who was in prison for trumped up charges for vote fraud in Alabama. And I immediately was sort of put into motion, both thinking about writing about music for him and thinking about how I took all the political stuff that was in the air, it was in at the time, and put it to use as a part of my writing. I always saw those two things as completely interconnected too, probably because I was part of that wave of politics and music, because I was part of that wave of the kids who, upon getting turned on to music in the late 70s, were seeing it as a social movement, particularly in the form of, at that time, punk, and then very, very shortly after becoming aware of hip hop. And so I started writing for him. Eventually he started publishing some of what I wrote, and we maintained we maintained the relationship for, you know, to this day. So,
Lauren, how about you?
Hey everybody, thank you so much, Lou, for pulling all this together. Yeah, I mean, I first read Dave. I mean, that's how I discovered him, I guess. And the piece I think I read first was on the Who in Rolling Stone when he had the American Grandstand column. And it was funny, by then I was just obsessed with music and reading music, but I couldn't, Rolling Stone wasn't at my local candy store newsstand, and that's where I bought magazines. So I was a Cream reader more than a Rolling Stone reader, and only occasionally saw issues of Rolling Stone. And the first one that somehow showed up, I read that article, and there's nothing exactly mind-blowing about that piece, but I think his passion for the music, his skills as a writer, and the way in which he, you know, he's such a Who fan, it gave me a framework to understand the Who. And I don't know, maybe it was 1,000 words, if that. I mean, those columns were short, but it just felt, and I've been thinking about this word a lot since the book came out, and it felt like an invitation. It didn't make me feel like I didn't know stuff or I needed to like be in the right crowd or know the right things. It was sort of like, come into my world, come into kind of how I'm thinking. And then I would just read him whenever I could. And I was a big Springsteen fan. And when he did the cover story in 1978 on Springsteen, which is just a terrific piece of writing, you know, he follows the tour for a couple of weeks in July of 1978. And that's kind of when I realized, oh, he writes about Springsteen. So I just really followed his work, was really interested in the way in which he contextualized the music in culture and politics in a way that I didn't think anybody else would be doing, or that I was reading that was doing that effectively. And he could write, you know, it was like, I always wanted to kind of keep reading, and I would learn a lot from his work. And we met when I got out of college. I was in New York for a couple of years, and I worked at Pantheon Books, who was publishing so many great people at that time in the mid 80s. And he was working with one of the editors there on a project, and the book, the rock and roll, at that time, Rock and Roll Confidential report came out from Pantheon. And that was just at the time I got there. And he was in the office one day, and I introduced myself. And similar to what Danny's saying, I mean, he was just kind to me. And I was a young writer, and I wanted to be connected to the music. And he, you know, kind of said, let me know how I can help you. And so we just stayed in touch over the years and got to be friends, I would say probably 20 years later. But it just gave me that real boost. But I always wanted to know what he thought about the current state of the music business and the world when I could find his work.
Daniel.
Yeah. Thank you for doing this, Lou. I see many people I know in this crowd, all of them smarter than I am, so I hope everybody's going to talk some. I will briefly tell you how I knew Dave. One of the people I think is watching is my older sister, who was an Elvis Presley fan. And she was kind enough or negligent enough to leave the Golden Hits album in our house. And I wasn't supposed to like Elvis Presley anymore. He was old, not fat yet, but old. But I did. I thought he was great. And that naturally carried over into Bruce Springsteen, who is Elvis's grandson, or maybe son. And my wife, Marta Renzi, made a video for public television called You Little Wild Heart, based on Springsteen music. And we wanted to get it to Bruce because we knew he was going to love it. And the way to do that was to get to Dave, which turned out to be easy. He called Marta back. You know, he was what Lauren said about invitations is absolutely right. And Danny, he was open to new stuff. So we went up to his apartment in New York City to show him the video. This was pre-internet. We couldn't get it to him any other way. And he was more than willing, let us in. I walked in the door and I was wearing an Elvis belt buckle. And he looked at it and he pointed at it and he said, "We're going to be friends." And that's where it started. And he was, funny and mean and full of anger and just a totally interesting guy from the beginning. So we hooked up 40 something years ago.
Maybe one of the things, and all of you have talked in one way or another about the politics being important in his writing that reached out to you. What is it in the politics that reached out to you? Anybody?
Well, funny and angry was where I was going with. It's complicated. We could spend the next hour talking about this. And if you guys have read the book, know that it's a complicated kind of politics. It's also what Springsteen said in that video. It mattered to him. And having the music matter to him meant, wait a second, Smokey Robinson is smarter than my racist father. It meant Madonna actually had something to say and was important, not just a face or a body. So the politics, part of the politics were acknowledging to me, all of these different aspects as legitimate and interesting and important. And the politics kind of flowed from that. Wait a second, if Smokey Robinson is actually smart, I got to rethink a whole series of things that America is telling me and that I don't believe in. And Dave was formidable at that.
I think I'd add that for me at a really young age, right, that art is political, that art is not a kind of cut off from the world, right? It's not this isolated entity. And so if you want to think about the music, if you want to learn about the music, it's really important that you understand a whole lot of other things around it. That was sort of what I saw originally, initially as a politics. And I think the other thing is maybe you need to do something about it. That just being a fan of something, and particularly around race, for example, like being a deeply knowledgeable and passionate fan of soul music, for example, doesn't mean you actually are doing anything. That you need to act on what you're finding in the music. That fandom isn't enough. Fandom can't, or knowledge about the music can't stand in as the only thing you would do. I think that's something that I saw as his politics.
Good.
Danny, if I could add something.
Sure.
I think part of that invitation was, it's part of that sense of, as you were saying, even fun in the funny and the mean, and the part of that invitation was an invitation. These musicians make music, and it was so clear that he understood this. There's this great old song by a band called the Del Lords about how the drummer plays the drums because of everything that's messed up in his life and how powerless he feels. And people make big sounds because they want to be heard in some way. And in that space created by this music, there was an invitation to have a discussion that nobody was having anywhere else. And that was just so clear in Dave's writing, that we had an opportunity for a discussion that was carved out by this music, I think.
Adam, you want to add anything? You want to ask?
Just by way of introduction,
or any question.
Yeah. I think I'll just throw out there that this is this was all new to me. I just finished the book this morning. Thank you, Lou, for lending me the advanced copy of it. I've read every page of it, and I think every page of it is really a treasure. And I'm not exaggerating. I think the story that it tells is so careful and intentional, and the writing, to me as an artist, guided by my understanding of what it means to be a revolutionary and a commitment to contributing to a revolutionary process. As an artist, specifically as a musician, is just incredibly energizing and inspiring. And some of the questions I'm bringing to this conversation that I hope to hear more from the panelists and everyone who's taken time out of their days to be here today have to do with not only the themes in the book about American music and what it says about us and where we are in history, but also like how can we as cultural workers continue to hold each other to these high standards? And when I say cultural workers, I use that intentionally to kind of cut across the boundary between musicians and music writers, because that's what comes across, is that Dave Marsh is an artist. He's not just a shadow artist, right? He's a storyteller in his own right, and he's challenging fellow artists to the highest possible standard. And so for me, as an artist pursuing like individual goals and stories and projects, developing an individual voice, I think I'm left with this question, like, how do we do this as a movement? Like, while giving each other space to develop our own individual voices, also like wage a war together as an army, fighting for, you know, a culture that reflects our full humanity and can transform society.
That's great.
So we got about an hour to solve that?
We could take an hour and 10 minutes if you'd like.
Okay.
What I'd like to do at this point, just to keep us on track, is since we've talked a lot about Dave's writing, maybe we can get into a little of it. And Daniel, you were going to read a piece, right?
Yeah, I'm going to read a piece he wrote about Nina Simone, just to give you a taste of his writing, which, you know, in the little video at the beginning, I think Marsh is on the money. I just think he's a very, very interesting writer. Take out everything else. I think he's amazing. So Nina Simone was born February 21, 1933, and died in April of 2003. And he wrote this in April 2003 for Counterpunch, a magazine that is still going, newsletter. Goes like this. It'll take a minute. Sonny Rollins once said that if Nina Simone was a jazz singer, then he didn't understand jazz. Nevertheless, a lot of her obituaries call her a jazz singer. They also refer to her as singing pop, cabaret, rhythm and blues, soul, blues, classical art song, and gospel. She had a different idea. If I had to be called something, it should have been a folk singer, because there was more folk and blues than jazz in my playing. Maybe that's true of her piano playing, but her singing, not her playing, defined her. Mainly it defined her as Nina Simone, sui generis. But if you need a label, try this one, freedom singer. The term describes her militant presence in the civil rights movement of the 1960s and the way that she sang both within and without the limits of predictable cadence and melody. More than that, it describes what she sought. Like her good friend James Baldwin and Lorraine Hansberry, Nina Simone made art about wanting to live like a free person. This certainly didn't mean to live or to sing like a white person, or for that matter, an American. It meant living and singing like a person who not only counted on the promise, but lived in the actuality of the American dream. Personally, she could be haughty, with audience as well as everyone else. But once the music started, her hauteur showed its real face, an unshakable, irrevocable commitment to her own self-worth, and by extension, ours too. This is what Aretha Franklin and everyone else found in songs like To Be Young, Gifted, and Black, and It's what let Simone set Mississippi Goddamn, otherwise a protest song, to a jaunty cabaret arrangement and fill it with jokes that turn out to be time bombs. The shadow that she casts across her blues, especially Nobody's Fault But Mine and Work Song, represents not so much what it is to live without freedom as what it is to live with the fear of losing the sense of self that allows freedom to exist. I wish I knew how it would feel to be free, she sang, so delicately that it sounds like she feared the concept would shatter from merely being uttered out loud. But she ends that song on an entirely different note. I sing because I know how it feels to be free. In that moment, so does the listener. This tension animates virtually every one of the songs she sang and all of the songs she wrote, starting with Four Women, which speaks like a condensed Toni Morrison novel 20 years early. Her classical training made her wish that she could convey that spirit simply by singing her songs. If you hear her sing, I Put a Spell on You, I Loves You Porgy, or To Love Somebody, you know she could. She still stands as the greatest interpretive singer of the 60s, pouncing on songs by the likes of Dylan, Leonard Cohen, George Harrison, and Randy Newman, with cat-like grace and singularly personal insight. This week, I find many of them too painful to listen to. But once Hansberry convinced Simone that joining in the movement would not diminish but enhance her work, she took off in the opposite direction. No singer, no artist committed herself or her work to the movement more fully than Simone, and she followed its twists and turns from the days of freedom marches to the less hopeful time of identity politics that lay just the other side. I Put a Spell on You, one of the great music autobiographies, spends at least as much time conveying her political attachments and adventures as talking about her music career or personal life. Simone took the treacheries with which the movement ended so deeply to heart that she went into exile, first in Liberia, then in Barbados, finally in the south of France. She returned occasionally, always written up as a self-involved diva, but perceptive as always. She found her native country's racial and political malaise, she said in 1996, worse than ever. In that respect, what a mercy that she will not, as planned, tour the US this spring. Nina Simone hasn't made an important record or written a well-known song since the early 70s. So in a sense, her absence will not be widely felt. But she had a song about that too. I've forgotten you, just like I said I would. Of course I have. Well, maybe except when I hear your name. The words are Hoagie Carmichael's. The sentiment is hers and ours.
Thank you. So we kind of want to open it up to folks to comment, and please, again, raise your hand to jump in. I'm going to start off. I probably shouldn't, but I'm going to start off because that's Nina Simone piece is really important to me. Because my introduction to Nina Simone was back in roughly 1967, something like that, when I saw her at the Troubadour Cafe in Los Angeles. And I knew her because of her singing, because of an album. But I was astounded by her piano playing at the same time. So in a certain sense, I came at it differently than what Dave writes about there. And when I saw her at that time, it blew me away and forced me to buy tickets to a show that she had at the Shrine Auditorium. Now, the Troubadour held maybe 300 people, but the Shrine held 3,000, and it was jammed. And it was the night before a big demonstration in San Francisco, an anti-war demonstration. I think the invasion of Cambodia had gone on and started. And she sang, her singing was so full of anger. It's what Dave describes, but it really was a send-off to that demonstration of tens, maybe 100,000 people up in San Francisco. So I think it speaks, I think, to what Adam was talking about in terms of the art and politics and what it means, and anyway, that's all I wanted to say about that. I think his writing really does capture the way I feel to this day about Nina Simone. This thing about I wish I knew how it feels to be free. That is a really important song for me, and so I'm leave it at that. And other folks, please chime in. Ruben, please.
Okay, I just want to say a few words here. I met Dave in 1983. I had put out a compilation album of Chicano rock from Los Angeles, East LA, and Dave gave a beautiful review when he was writing for the Boston Phoenix. And he gave it was the first time that we had a national review of the music scene, of the Chicano rock music scene here in Los Angeles. And so I'm very grateful for that. Later, he asked me to write a chapter for his book that he was doing called The Real World of Rock and Roll. And I wrote a piece on the history of Chicano rock, LA Chicano rock. And that kind of launched my my journalism work. That was edited by Lee Bellinger. So I'm grateful for that. And just want to say that thank you, Dave, for supporting the Chicano rock community here in Los Angeles. Greatly appreciated, and just want to say thank you, man. Thanks a lot. That's it.
Ben, could you just give us a little bit about? I mean, tell us about the book that you wrote just a few years ago. So your memoir.
Oh yeah. Well, well, that just covers my life as a musician, writer, performer, theater person, and it came out in 2018 by University of California Press, called Confessions of a Radical Chicano Doo-Wop Singer. And again, Dave gave a beautiful little blurb on that book, which again I appreciate. So no, yeah, Dave is a good friend, man, and I appreciate all that he's done for the Chicano rock community here in Los Angeles.
I know that many times in the last I don't know how many years now, but many times he's referred back to your writing, Ruben, and to the importance of the Chicano rock community. So I think the feeling is mutual. It wasn't just he appreciates your work as well.
Well, yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, he gave a nice little shout out to one of the tracks on that Los Angelinos compilation. My band back then was a band called Con Safos, 2 words, and one of the tracks was C/S, which is an abbreviation for Con Safos, and that was a kind of a spoken word piece before there was rap, really, and it was like a prototype of rap, a spoken word piece about the abuses of the Mexicans here in Los Angeles. So he was very observant and very careful to see the work, from someone that had a kind of a political revolutionary voice, and I appreciate that he picked up on that, on my work. Very grateful.
Thank you, Ruben. Greg Johnson wanted to say something.
Oh, Greg.
Hey, everybody. Danny's in the other room here at the Blue Door. We're doing an event tonight for the book, and
oh, great.
I met Dave. I met Dave in 1996 at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's tribute to Woody Guthrie, when I was there with Jimmy LaFave, and we've been friends ever since. And sort of like Jackson Browne said when he met Dave, you have no reason to write "Take It Easy." I shook Dave's hand and said, "Man, you've really pissed me off about a lot of things you said in Rolling Stone." And he laughed, and we have been friends ever since. And one thing that I love about Dave, and I think that everybody in this group will agree, is how he is a conduit for community. He is a person that believes in community. And after we met, after Jimmy and I,
Yolanda
and
Catalico
Alejandro
has got
Escovedo,
mentioned
and
in
some
the
other
chat that she'd
people
like
from the
to
Austin and
say
Oklahoma
something.
music
So
scene met
Go
Dave
ahead,
in the,
Yolanda,
in the
go ahead.
90s. We would gather every year at Folk Alliance or South by or some other events, and this group of musicians and people that worked in music and music writers and stuff would get together and we discuss every idea, everything under the sun. And
Yolanda,
you
your
know,
sound
Dave
is
always wanted to
not
come
working
to
good.
some conclusions. I said, Dave, we can't get to conclusions on
Can
some
you
of
hear
this,
me?
you know.
What I wanted to say
And so it just
when I
grew after
spoke with
that,
my
and it's just been a
European
real treat to
friends,
to
they
be his
said,
friend. And I want to thank
yes,
Danny
born in
and Daniel for putting this thing
1972,
together, putting this
was not
compilation
that
together,
well known that
and
she
it's a
became
joy for me to be able to
famous when she
introduce
stayed
to
in
all my
Europe,
friends the
because
writing
a
of
lot
Dave
of our
Marsh. And it's not that we
singers
have
that
to agree
are
with Dave
African
about
American,
everything, because God knows I
progressive,
don't, and we've
radical,
argued.
they're not
And it's been
really,
fun, and it's been,
they're
it's
not
been
really talked about, they're
a
not really
joy. And that's
played.
kind of what
So
all his
that's
books are about, to open
that
that
female
dialogue and open that
because she
conversation.
did
So
leave the
for
United
me,
States, and I guess
Dave
she
and
left in
community
71.
are
That's
synonymous,
how
and they
her
always will
more
be.
her
So I want to
music
thank all you
became
guys,
known.
and
You guys
anybody
know.
that's in Oklahoma City tonight, come out
Yeah, so
to the Blue Door. There's going to be some
times,
music from
and
our
there's
friends.
another performer who the same
Jimmy
thing
LaFave
happened.
songs to be
They were
played, some Patty
known,
Griffin
they
songs to be
weren't talked
played, and
about that
it's
much
going to be
in the
great.
United
So
States, but
anyway,
for
thank you guys so
Europe,
much for
become
all you've done.
Can you
popularized.
talk just a little bit about Dave
Thanks,
and
Yolanda.
Patty Griffin and Jimmy
Hear me?
LaFave?
Yeah, well,
We heard you, yes.
Dave,
other folks.
Dave got to know
Okay.
Patty from the first few records, and she was, of course, is now, of course, very well known. But like anyone who works in the folk Americana indie rock world knows that these people
Sounds like
aren't
Ruben wants to talk.
super famous. There's, these people aren't going to be recognized going down the street like Taylor Swift would be or anybody like that. And Dave would always champion people like Patty and Jimmy LaFave and Michael Fracasso, and of course Alejandro Escovedo, people that are never going to make they're never going to be like the Who or Bruce. They're never going to get to that level. It just never was going to happen. And Dave was just always the first to try to convince people to live their art, no matter what the business does to you or does to it, and to live it and to keep working at it. And he's always been so encouraging. And I think that's one of the, which is, I'm glad that you all have had those three pieces about Jimmy and Alejandro and Patty in the book, because that's just an example of Dave. And I mean, I remember taking him to see people he'd never seen before, and he goes, "Man, you were right about this one," And so he was always open to finding new music, even though I thought Dave Marsh knew everything about music there was to know on the whole planet, And so that's just another example of him being open to letting people know what's good,
Well, speaking about being open to what's good, I think we're going to ask Lauren to read a selection that she likes, especially from the book.
Yeah. So right, it's from Kick Out the Jams. This is also from Counterpunch. And I'm not muted, am I? Zoom is asking me to unmute myself. Okay. This is Shelley Stewart Radio and the Birmingham Civil Rights Movement. And I really am interested in this piece in the way that Dave digs behind the stories of the music, and also always connects other things that he might be reading, and gave a lot of credit where credit was due. Plus, it's an example of a fantastic opening sentence, just as a writer. So I'll read a few passages from this. This is from June of 2002. Shelley Stewart retired with fanfare from WATV-AM last week. The wire service story focused on his long tenure as a Birmingham disc jockey, originally known as Shelley the Playboy, and talk show host, his membership in the Black Radio Hall of Fame, his ability to attract a white teenage audience at the height of the civil rights movement in the most violently racist city in America, and the Ku Klux Klan describing the records he played as jungle music. It mentioned that Stewart co-owned WATV and that he is working on a memoir. It told less than half the story. A quotation from what looks like the proposal for the road south. The memoir begins by recounting Stewart's father murdering his mother with an axe, he and his siblings eating fried rat for Sunday dinner, and winds up with him owning the station and a $40 million company. The Road South material mentions Stewart, quote, scorching the airwaves with incendiary social commentary and information vital to Martin Luther King Jr. and the rising civil rights movement. Now we're getting somewhere. Diane McWhorter's Pulitzer-winning Carry Me Home, Birmingham, Alabama, the climactic battle of the Civil Rights Revolution, the most detailed report on the Birmingham Civil Rights Movement, establishes Stewart and fellow WENN-AM DJ Tall Paul Dudley White as indispensable to the Birmingham movement, attracting activist students. Between playing James Brown records and making fun of racist cop Bull Connor getting busted on morals charges, Stewart and White provided the crucial information that led kids into the movement. They, quote, were happy to go on the radio and announce hot luncheon at the Gaston Motel for some of their friends, beauty queens and football stars they had gotten to know at school dances. 20 or 30 high school big shots and church youth leaders showed up for a strategy meeting. Their assignment was to start a whisper campaign on upcoming workshops and youth rallies. The Klan had seen it coming. They cut down the WENN radio tower in 1958 in an attempt to get Stewart off the air. That didn't work. The more effective corporate methods of choking off radio's power hadn't been invented yet. And he goes on, he said, this reveals not only the inspirational world of the civil rights movement, which galvanized communities like Black Birmingham for righteous action, it also shows what was possible when radio could still be used for human purposes, not just to make money. And he ends the piece by saying, our job, it seems to me, is to try to make it come again. Remembering what Shelley the Playboy and the kids of Birmingham set in motion, and how they did it is a place to begin.
So what I would respond to on that, Lauren, and maybe you could continue, is the title of this program is Music Writing Like Life Depends On. And it comes from your introduction to the book. And that piece is really sort of indicative of that, I think. But maybe you could elaborate on what you find in Dave's writing as it's music writing like life depends on it.
Yeah, two things come to mind, I think, Lou, when you frame it like that. I think the first is, and you know, one of the things I mentioned in the intro, right, was that Dave came up at a time when the idea that we'd be writing about rock and roll or soul music as important cultural forms was still, you know, relatively new and kind of a joke, you know. I was going to say the word serious, but Dave would smack me if he heard me describing it as serious, but that, you know, still very much working in a high culture, low culture sort of model. And I think the idea that a pop record of 2 minutes and 12 seconds coming over AM radio had power and artistic merit and represented voices that needed to be heard was something he argued for. And there was a lot of resistance to, and I think sometimes there still is. So I think that's one of the things. The other is, and I'm really struck in looking at this book, you know, Dave is a prolific writer. I mean, geez, this stuff is just excerpting the work, you know, not the books, right? So I also think that you get, as you read Kick Out the Jams, the importance of the work, like working through it, writing through to an idea, and that is, you know, Adam, you made that great point about, you know, cultural workers, right? And the idea, I feel like, is that I get the sense of somebody sitting down probably every day and just starting to write through, what am I listening to? What might it mean? How does it connect with what I've already heard? What don't I know about it? How does it connect to what I'm reading and what's happening kind of in the world? And there's so much, he has such a large body of work that I feel like that's also, you see that as a process, as a series of ideas being worked out really over decades.
That's interesting. And what that brings to mind is very, what that brings to mind for me is a conversation I had with Jackson Brown many years ago. I was a bookseller in Los Angeles, and he was one of my customers. And he called up one day about some books, and we got started talking because I just bought his album Lives in the Balance, and speaking about, you know, writing as if your life depends on it. It struck me that music writing, that those songs were about life depending upon art depending upon life. In any event, we had this conversation, and I, to use your words of serious, our conversation was about whether or not rock musicians took their writing seriously. And of course, I was quite, you know, I hadn't taken rock musicians seriously up until that point. And Jackson was really very adamant about how important that was. And he said, if you really want to listen to some serious writing and understand what that means, you should get Steve Van Zant's new album, which of course I did. I went out and bought that. But I thought that was very interesting. This, you know, how important, how much life depends upon the cultural writing that is going on. Danny, any thoughts about that?
Hey, Lou, don't mean to interrupt, but Craig
hand
Warner's got his hand up.
Craig, yes, please, Craig. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just briefly wanted to say in response to the passage that Lauren read, and the general question of how art and politics work. One of the things that's been at the core of Dave's sensibility since I've known it all along has been that it's not about the stars, it's not about the leaders. And that has been a fight. As somebody who's worked in Afro-American studies for my whole career, it has been so damn hard to get that message out to people who want it to be about King, or want it to be about Malcolm, or want it to be about Barack Obama, or you name it. But the way he brings home the message about it's about us, and we got to do it. It's about the empowerment, is so absolutely crucial. And I marvel at the way he's able to do that in relationship to communities which are either totally ignorant of the idea. I think everybody in this meeting today gets that to begin with, but boy, it's not common knowledge out there in the world. And he fought that good fight, fought it well. And he really understood how that traced back to the foot soldiers in Birmingham. Birmingham wasn't about King. Birmingham was about the ordinary folks. Yeah. And I just want to say that if you don't know Dave's work well, Lauren's introduction to Kick Out the Jams is just a masterpiece. It's really beautiful. Start there.
Can't agree more. Thank you. Thank you, Craig. Eric, you have your hand up?
I do. I just wanted to follow up on the piece that Lauren read and what it made me think of, and what reading Kick Out the Jams reminds me of. One of the things is just what a good journalist and a reporter and historian Dave is as well. I mean, he's a tremendous critic, and that's kind of what he's known best for. But, you know, the histories that are within his books are tremendous, and he's a terrific reporter. And like a great journalist, he can distill a tremendous amount of information down to, you know, 750,000 words, like Lauren said. And that's crucial, I think, in, you know, in if we're talking about the ability for the work to have an impact, Yes, obviously, depth is required, but equal to just as important is the ability to get the stories told quickly, accurately, meaningfully, and in a way that, going back to what Lauren and others have said, invites the reader in. And he's terrific at all of that.
Thank you. Other folks. There's so many people on this call who really.
Brett has his hand up, I believe.
Brett, go right ahead, Brett.
Okay. I'm a visual artist, a painter, and I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee. And I wanted to say that for me, Dave really orchestrated the idea that through music, you can lodge a complaint. And from, the opening notes of Louie Louie and the following guitar solo to growing up listening to Hank Jr. sing his father songs in the hall between bells, I became politicized through the idea of music being a channel for lodging a grievance. And whether it's the blues or, the Fugs, who I recently saw up in Woodstock, and the ability to inject and access music from other domains, I think Dave championed that, and that the idea of poets like Ed Sanders, say, for instance, and Tuli Kupferberg, who were able to put to music poetry, and the idea of lyrics and words combined with musical tonations. When I first heard the Stooges to MC5, my politics became galvanized. And I think that, like Lauren said, there is almost an obligation from artists to become cultural critics, if nothing else, and that serves a purpose in itself. So again, just the ability to access things through music, which I still use as a touchstone to know what's going on in the culture, and it's a beckoning call.
Go ahead, Debbie.
Okay, thanks. The title of this book is taken from the MC5's album. Is that it? Kick Out the Jams?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Danny, do you want to say a little bit about that?
Well, I am unmuted, right?
Yes.
For some reason I still have a thing that says unmute myself. Dave really came out aside from being shaped by Motown, living in Motown, and when he was 18 years old, he was a diehard fan of the MC5 and very much a part of the movement that took shape around them in like 68, 69. He was in an organization called the White Panther Party, right? It was associated with the MC5, which, because the name sounds so white supremacist, the first point in the Panthers program was the complete agreement with the Black Panthers program. So he used Kick Out the Jams a number of ways throughout the years. It was the name of his radio show on Sirius until very recently, when that station's gone now. The particular station it was on, but he did it for like 20 years on there, and always started the show with Kick Out the Jams, with the motherfuckers line in there too. So you wanted to get that on the air. I always felt like, first of all, the synthesis that was going on with MC5 was really important to him, because they were a hard, raunchy punk band before we even had a sense of punk. They were metal, but their allegiances were to jazz, and particularly free jazz and experimentation. and R&B. It was all in there. Soul. It was all in there, what they were doing in this kind of punk way. And I think I've always felt like the title itself suggests something about kicking, you know, first of all, pumping out the music, but in the process, you're knocking down walls.
Cool. Other comments in general, not necessarily about this one thing. But...
I'll say something. Dan Weinberg.
Go ahead, Dan.
Okay. I think I must have read Dave Marsh in the 60s, 70s in Chicago Tribune, Reader, or whatever. I mean, he was very good writer. I don't remember specifically reading his stuff, but I remember rock and roll as like a force, and Kick Out the Jams, MC5, and it was all pretty good time. I remember I saw Led Zeppelin in 1969, I think, in the Aragon, and I was so out of it that I could barely remember anything. But the Led Zeppelin, Jethro Tull, and the Who? No, is that possible? I doubt it. But Dave Marsh, I always respected rock and roll writers like Lester Bangs, Dave Marsh, and so on. Dave Cott, I think in Chicago. Anyways, that's about all I got to say. Thanks.
I think we're at the segue point into Danny reading the piece that he selected from, I think it's the Kurt Cobain piece in Kick Out the Jams.
Luke, can I say a word? This is Austin.
Austin, yeah, please. Austin, and it looks like Rand has something and one other person. So before we get to Danny, we'll get those three.
And maybe, yeah, cut it off at those three. Great.
Yeah.
Okay. I couldn't find the way to raise my hand on my phone. Unlike the other people who've spoken, I never knew Dave Marsh, and I didn't know much about the music industry. I was just a fan of rock and roll music. And I think what Dave Marsh's writing did was connect the dots between the sounds of music and the rest of life. We all get fixed on the individual dots, what artists look like, what they wear, how they sound, the fantasies they gin up in us. And Dave's thinking, set down in simple words on paper, said, wait a minute, there's a lot more going on here than what you're enthralled by. Let me link up some things you may not have thought about. That's what it means to me.
Thank you, Austin. I think that's great. So we got Rand and then we got Marcus.
Yeah, well, this Rand, I was a kid up on the upper shores line of Lake Michigan, the lakeside across from Traverse Bay. We used to steal the small transistor radio from an uncle, a relative, and get up on top of the dunes so we could listen to WLS. I remember the first time I heard talking about my generation, and it led me to a lifelong experience with music as a performer. And my mama said it kept me out of jail.
Cool. Marcus, hello there.
Hey, hello everybody. The connection with Dave Marsh was the notion that when Lou handed me the Rock and Roll Confidential, and he says, read this. I'm like, okay, I'll read it. I read what this white boy's saying, and wondering what the hell's going on, listening to, Exit and Redbone and Buffy St. Marie, Robbie Robinson, and later on John Trudell, all those musicians that people don't really recognize as the basis of, Native American, like the traditional songs and rock and roll, and movies about that, where Native people, the basis of especially African American Southern music, jazz and blues about Native music is the sole basis of American culture. And that Dave wrote about that, and Dole wrote about how, and I think somebody said that, is that where is the North American music, where we are in history. Right now, we can talk about the past, which I always talk about that, doing radio every single week, and using music as a connector to many of the social problems and the frontline fighters and our indigenous communities, and coming up with Indigenous Peoples Day, and people saying, "Oh, it's really great," everything, but we're still getting screwed up. In the urban areas, there's still homelessness and medical, situation and housing and the way the economy is, and people trying to create a story of, well, we're getting better. And I'm going, where and when? We're, like what happened in Lahaina in Hawaii, that whole discussion, we're not getting any better. So where are the new musicians now? And the old people that covered that story, Dave really brought it out. He didn't bullshit anybody. He brought it out in his writing, and he brought it up saying, where are we in history today? This thing about Nina Simone is that she talked about that, but yet the stories, we're all storytellers, the writers, the artists, the musicians, the poets, like this people were talking about. It reminds me of Jack Hirschman, the profound, and Angelo and all those, poets and musicians and artists that reflect where we're going today. And I think that's the question of the day, is that where we are in history. I think we have a terrific history that Dave talked about, and brought up the questions of male supremacy, brought up the questions of white supremacy, brought up the questions of this inequities and the rulers that be, and how we're going to combat that. And so I thought, Dave, when you presented me, read this and bringing it to the powwow circuit, bringing it to our, our musicians and cultural people, read his writing, because it connects all the rest of what people said to where I was at, and still at what to say, like the Zapatistas say, from the bottom, not no commercial radio, just from the bottom up, and to the left, and so I think that really exemplifies what Dave's writing. So I'll stop there. Thank you, everybody.
That makes me very pleased to know that every once in a while a story comes out like that I actually turned you onto a book that was that important. I'm excited about. Marcus, I appreciate that. Thank you. Danny, would you like to lead us into the next section with your reading?
Yeah, those were great. I was trying to write a response. Yeah, I think it's that materialism. I mean, Dave studied the industry, he studied the world around it, the intersection of those things. If you're going to talk about community, it has to be, I mean, a great starting point is watching how a band works on stage, but it's also, it's the band audience and the entire world that allows that to happen or doesn't allow that to happen. Back in the 90s, I did a little book for Dave that was about the size of this, little CD size book called, it was about Soul Asylum, band Soul Asylum, that was big at that time. And I picked them because I knew that was about as close as I was to any band in the mainstream, in the sense that we came from the same impulse, which was initially sort of the punk attempt to sort of overthrow the rock star concept. And then, this underground built out of that. It built in metal, it built in hip hop, it built in punk. I mean, those are different threads completely. But the reason I'm saying all of this is that built into that punk ethos was something, this concept that comes really, Dave traced in this piece, Suicide Notes, I'm going to read from, which came out I remember him showing it to Lee, and he'd put like 2,000 words into it or something for our newsletter. And he said to keep going. He said, "Oh, I am." And he wrote 5,000 words, filled up. It was just a whole issue of the newsletter. And I remember talking to Dave Pirner, who was the lead singer at Top of the World at that time with that band, but not for long, in the 90s. And he talked about how he carried that issue around with him, and he would reread this. And I think I'm reducing 5,000 words to, 5 paragraphs, but I think you might have a sense of why this resonates. And just recently, when we did a piece with a thing in my hometown, one of the musicians there has had a lot of health problems and that sort of thing, and struggles in sort of the underground scene there, the indie scene. Talked about, he read from this too. It's called Suicide Notes, and it is written after the death of Kurt Cobain to try to make sense of not just why Kurt Cobain took his life, but what this means to us as fans of music and the ethics in music that can get in our way sometimes, the myths that can get in our way, particularly this myth of authenticity. And let me just read as in a form that's artifice. Let me just read these few pieces, and hopefully they'll hang together. Last April 5th, this is June 1995. Last April 5th, Kurt Cobain put a gun to his head. On April 7th, a workman discovered his body. In millions of heads, including my own, the echo of that shot still has not died. The night that the electrician found Cobain's body, someone who worked for him approached me in real distress. "I don't understand how this happened," he said in genuine mourning. "How do you get through to a guy who feels like a bigger and bigger failure the more people respond to him? And the more he says he's a failure, the bigger the response." I mean, Kurt Cobain was an artist, and he wrote about it in his suicide note, who was tortured by being popular, in essence, once he achieved that level of fame. And that is, was a common issue among a lot of musicians that came from the same era that I did. And I think it's built in there. As he points out, everything that was influenced by folk in rock in some way carries this legacy a little bit. Anyway, back to this. What Cobain received from the first generation punks was inspiration and a set of assumptions. If Kurt Cobain had grown up in the 50s or 60s or even the early 70s, before what we kind of think of as the punk movement, which would be late 70s, if he was anybody from Lou Reed to Melissa Etheridge, his early encounters with rock and roll almost certainly would have represented a glorious possibility, a chance to communicate across all the gaps in our society, gaps of class, race, region, gender, generation, education, you name it. Used this way, rock and roll became not just a way out of impoverished working class or straitjacketed middle class existence, but a method of absolutely transforming yourself, a means of becoming who you'd always dreamed of being, confronting your fears with the power to transmute them into assets, a chance to be a hero not only to others, but in your own life, to articulate out loud a vision of the world you'd previously have been terrified to whisper into the mirror, of such things as freedom constructed. Again, there's nothing inherent about rock stardom in this. Oh, I shouldn't have read that line. I'm talking about the contradictions he's dealing with in his fame. John Lennon, to choose a performer in many ways similar to Cobain in his drives and insights, never had to worry about such things. Even at his most despairing on Plastic Ono Band, Lennon never descended into nihilism, because he expressed his despair in terms that implied that any such obstacle could be overcome if only the right mechanism, political, personal, psychological, religious, could be located Even Iggy and the Stooges, by far the darkest band of rock's first 2 decades, No Linger on Your Pale Blue Eyes for the Ig, sounded as if they believed in a way out, or for that matter, as if the life force in their death trip songs might be so powerful it could drag them out of its own murderous maws. That way out might be painful, dangerous, and not a little self-threatening, but it was a pathway out of nothingness, not just another route to describing it, but a means of obliterating the hollow core of the everyday and bursting through into free space, beyond all doubt. When you did that, the music promised, and early results demonstrated the world would change, at least as it presented itself to you because you had changed. Kurt Cobain didn't hear No Fun, great Stooges song, as a protest. He heard it as a description of how things were and how they would stay. In the world he was born to, he literally couldn't imagine changing things. The best he could hope to achieve was to stay outside the corruption, stay true to his principles, not sell out, never become phony, never fake it, which is a real concise version of the punk ethos. What I've come to believe is that Kurt Cobain did not die because he could not fit in, but because he did, which is why I can take my solace not from Neil Young's stumbling for an explanation, much as I relate to it, or from Courtney Love's vainglorious efforts to put the principles that doomed Kurt into practice, compelling as I find lived through this, or in my friend Gina Arnold's bittersweet efforts to put the passion of Nirvana's fans into words, but only in the half-intelligible singing of Michael Stipe, REM's Michael Stipe, on Automatic for the People, a fit epitaph for rock and roll's first celebrity shotgun suicide, if there ever was one. Stipe said later he and Cobain had been talking a lot while planning a collaboration. I don't know what Michael tried to say to Kurt in their last few conversations, but in my imagination, he sings him a lullaby that says, when you're sure you've had enough of this life, well, hang on. I don't know what really happened in those talks or in the last days of Kurt Cobain's life. I do know that those of us left behind had better start singing such things to one another, or we will find our way to the ocean, not like the water that runs down so beautifully at the end of Automatic for the People and find the river, but like lemmings. Hang on.
Powerful. Adam, I know that you have a response to this and some questions, so I'd kind of like you to enter into this at this point.
Whew. Thank you for reading that, Danny, and thanks, Lou, for tossing it to me. I am just letting that sink in again. What I shared with Lou earlier was that I found that essay to be one of the most soul-wrenching in the collection, and kind of one of the ones that like gives a kind of through line to the whole book. And I think the title of this event that comes from Lauren's introduction, music writing like our lives depend on it, really captures that essence and that through line. And it was kind of funny, the timing of it, because we just passed through the Jewish high holidays, and the 10 days leading up to Yom Kippur, which was Monday, are really like a time for existential self-reflection and spiritual transformation, really asking ourselves, like, what is the purpose of my life? And I feel like that's the question that Dave Marsh is asking us over and over again, especially in this essay, trying to put Kurt Cobain's suicide in context. And it was funny because on Wednesday I saw Lou at the league meeting of our local cultural workers collective. And he saw how much of the book I had not read yet, based on where my bookmark is. And I said, I've been getting ready for the high holidays. I've been music, and I do music at my synagogue as well. And reading, and he says, what, you're not considering this scripture? And it was a joke then, but after reading it, it's still funny because it's actually true. I feel like this text in particular can be read as a sacred text, especially like leading up to the high holidays and Yom Kippur. But really the whole book is music writing like our lives depend on it. And the themes of life and death and meaning keep coming up. The collection, you all chose to start it with the essay on Elvis. And he asks the same question about Elvis's death as he asks about Kurt Cobain's, which is, we should think not what does this death say about the artist, but what does this death say about us as individuals and as a society? And of course, there's the through line of the death of his own daughter, Kristen Carr, of cancer at the age of 21 or 20. And over and over again, he's going through his own existential wrestling transparently out in the open as he writes about music, and putting this question to us about what really is the purpose of living our lives, accepting dehumanization and being less than what we are, and accepting a world that kills our spirit. And it really to me like achieves a spiritual power. And I have a little more I might say about that later, and I have another selection from the book I might read if we have time, but I'll stop there and pass the mic. Thanks for throwing it to me.
One of the things I think that does is it answers a question I had for you, Adam, which is, much of the writing about artists and musicians, it comes from before, some of it, a lot of it before you were born. So a lot of it is music that you love, but not have had a direct, immediate personal experience with, right? And so I think that what you just said gives us something of an understanding of what it is that strikes you about this writing that resonates with now. And I think that's really important here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just say that it was interesting reading it in chronological order. It starts in the 80s and it pretty quickly gets to, 1989, which is the year I was born. And then after that, I'm reading it and it's like a history of the world and the country that I grew up in. And by the time it gets to things that I actually remember, it was a really rich experience, tracing these, but also like any music lover, particularly of eclectic American music, my influences trace way back to the earliest of the roots music that he writes about, and all the way to stuff that's at the kind of cutting edge of hip hop and other youth driven forms today. I think it's really relevant for new generations as well. That's all I'll say right now.
Folks have talked about how one of the things about what you get from Dave Marsh's writing and also from the music is that it can't stop there. It has to be carried out in some sort of practical work. And Dave, so there's a relationship between the cultural work and quote unquote activism. And I think this is as good a place as any, especially since Adam referred to it. to talk a little bit about Dave's work around the Kristen Ann Carr Foundation, and maybe Daniel, you could bring us into that.
Sure. When Kristen died, Dave and his wife Barbara started the Kristen Ann Carr Fund. She died of a rare sarcoma, a kind of cancer, and people didn't know much about it. And they set about raising money and used the music industry in part to do it. I mean, they had famous people contribute, and they have raised millions of dollars. I went to the latest benefit, which was a couple of weeks ago, where these doctors from Memorial Sloan Kettering stood up and said, you know, you guys think you're just having a party here and being generous, you're saving lives. There are people who would not have survived if this fund didn't exist. And Dave and Barbara and Sasha, their other daughter, and a bunch of other people did this. And it's what you said, Lou. It's applying practically a bunch of sort of theoretical politics and really making a difference in people's lives. It was very moving to be there. It continues to be a great organization, the Kristen Ann Carr Fund, and Dave and Barbara continue to be involved.
But also, I think, can you also elaborate on some of the other the branch, maybe the branches that went into? Because I know Danny talks about the healthcare stuff that happened at the Folk Alliance, and I can't remember now.
Well, I can certainly add that. Yeah, I mean, Dave was constantly looking for ways to connect things, and we had panels at South by Southwest and at Folk Alliance International on healthcare and musicians, and worked with groups. I mean, I first met him at something called not first met him, but after I met him, re-met him at a thing called Art Meets Labor, which was about organizing, artists organizing and the connections to laborers organizing, right? But yeah, wherever he was, which that work extended directly with the Kristen Ann Carr Fund into all kinds of work with healthcare now, and being Santa at Christmas at Sloan Kettering or something, I think, right, for years. But he also, it's probably worth mentioning here that, I mean, like when I walked away with the Spielberg, Gordon, and Leonard Peltier information, which led me to join the Leonard Peltier Defense Committee and start writing in the Kansas City area, where I was just moving. Dave did a lot of work with the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign, helped organize a music day and a Poor People's March through Philadelphia. The working with doing those healthcare panels with the Folk Alliance International and South by Southwest was a way of building connections through those organizations as well. And the range of work that he was involved with pretty much spans everything that everybody here is working on. There's a particularly poignant piece in the book where he witnesses the execution of a friend on death row, and talks about what this says about our society and why he had to be there, right? So I mean, I'm just that personal and political is just so closely connected, and runs through everything here. And I don't know, I feel like I might be going into the weeds, but to me it seemed like this is this was one great, that's an incredible organization they made, and I think is the only thing that really got sarcoma was not very, very well known at all when they started that organization, right? And it's really gotten that off the ground, that research. But Dave was doing that and continues to do that in every part of his life, make connections and build.
Anything else, Daniel? No. Okay, well, we certainly have more time for comments, and there are lots of people who haven't spoken. Um, Let me run down the list here. Marta, did you want to add anything, Marta Renzi? Apparently not. Tammy, thinking of you, Tamara Smith. Any comments?
Hey, Lou. This has been great. Oh, sorry, I've been asked to start my video. Apologize. Okay. Yeah, I don't really have too much to add, but I do want to say something related to FACT and Dave Marsh. I met Dave Marsh through FACT and through Mary Morello, and I just want to give her a shout out. Her 100th birthday is tomorrow. We invited her to be here for this discussion. Oh, Mary Morello. Well, I met her through FACT, my censorship organization that you talked about before the recording started. That was, I think, sort of centered around Dave Marsh's 100 Ways to Fight Censorship. And she had her own newsletter called Parents for Rock and Rap, which I and my friend Virus X both helped her with. And she was an anti-censorship crusader. She still is. And her son, Tom Morello, is a guitarist for Rage Against the Machine. So that may be why you might recognize the name Morello. But she was a school teacher in Libertyville, Illinois. And she dealt with a lot of stuff, including racist threats against her son. They found a noose in the school, or no, in their garage. It was a very direct threat against him. But she's been outspoken and just a fantastic activist for many, many, many years. So I basically just want to give a shout out to her, even though she's not here today.
Thank you.
I just want to add, Lou, as when I was ticking off those things, another great example is we have Donna here from Bruce Funds, and she had this idea of making sure that people who wanted to go to these shows could go to these shows, so fans could buy tickets for other people and trade them off and make sure everybody could go to see these Springsteen shows, which for a lot of people are, you know, re-energizing, fortifying part of their existence, and many people have, for any number of reasons can't afford those things, and Donna's been doing that. I don't know, 20 years, but he does a lot to support her. He has her on his show. He has her on his shows and things like that, and really champions her work. And I think probably helped it get going. I don't know, Don. But...
Thank you, Danny. Actually, Dave was an inspiration of mine. From the moment I first saw his book Glory Days on a Caldor bookshelf in the 80s, and I long admired his writing and came to learn he was on the radio by chance when someone said they want to talk to the woman who's giving away Springsteen tickets for free. And that's how I got to meet one of my heroes. And the very first time I met him face to face, the sincerity in his words and in his eye contact with me just proved everything I felt I'd already knew from his writing. And Yes, he definitely championed my efforts in 2012, and he and Barbara both remain inspirations to me to carry on, helping others who are disadvantaged in one way or another. Thank you.
Thank
great.
you for everything you do.
Tom Duffy says in the chat, he's declining to speak today, but wants to thank so many of you with whom I've connected through the years and to know Dave's long support for my work at Billboard. So thank you, Tom, for that.
Thank you, Tom.
And Marta says, my audio is not working. How about playing some music? Alejandro Escovedo. Well, we're going to close out with a piece of music, but we're going to wait just a few minutes on that to see whether there are more comments people want to make. Anything else? The floor is open for a few more minutes, and we're going to do like a lightning round, as they say, of closing remarks from Daniel, Danny, and Lauren, and we'll close it out. There's somebody who wants to say something.
I'm
Go ahead, Adam.
I'm looking around for hands as a moderator, but I'm also happy to share one more piece from the book that connects to the conversation. If
that would be
now's
great.
time for that. I'm gonna just hold one more beat for if anyone who hasn't spoken yet would like to say something now.
Patricia has her hand up.
Yeah.
Again, yeah. Oh, get away. I'm having
There we
trouble.
go.
Damn it.
You want a minute to think?
I can't get on. Shit.
You're
We
on.
can
We can hear you.
we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Really?
And see you.
Okay.
Go for it.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that I feel bad that number one, I haven't finished the book, but I feel that I have a special blessed life because of Dave Marsh. And I did become a person that would call the station, but I don't know how many people knew that I met him just about exactly 20 years ago. And the book came out like 10 days later. And I met him because my sister was dying of cancer, and he came to Detroit, to Cranbrook, to talk about his book, and we just clicked. I can honestly say there's only one other man who has touched my life, and that would be my dad. But we've kept a friendship, and I'm hearing I see the words, the book. I just miss him because he's off the radio now. But I've learned so many things, and even life lessons, or even opened up musicians when I listened to when he was on 3 times a week on Sirius. So I feel so blessed that I have a special Detroit and connection that maybe some of my friends didn't know, that I really had met him 20 years ago. And my son, I have a picture right here on my desk. My son was about 3, and we're both wearing Springsteen shirts, but it was the day that I did meet Dave Marsh.
Great. Great. Adam, go ahead.
Thank you, Patricia, for that just like raw personal testimony. I feel there's so much power in that. I'm really grateful for everyone who shared their personal connections, and to feel like that connection as someone who had none at all. I would love to share a little bit from the essay on Dorothy Love Coates, which I feel like kind of speaks to the spiritual themes that I feel are a major thrust of the story that this collection tells and that Dave Marsh's writings tell. And just like saying it works as a sacred text for Yom Kippur, it was also funny this morning. In order to finish the book, I had to skip the Torah study session that I go to religiously, all puns intended, every Saturday at my synagogue, which I'll mention is an anti-Zionist synagogue, Tzedek Chicago. And we really dig deep into Bible for liberation theology every week. And I feel that the themes of how Black American liberation theology runs through all American music come out really clearly in this collection, in this essay, in the one about Shelley Stewart that Lauren read, in the review of Wrecking Ball, Who Set Our Souls Free, the Bruce Springsteen album that Danny wrote with Dave, and others. I just want to read a little bit from this. Motown's calculated sound was trying to bring us together, on the dance floor anyway, with a strategy that might best be summed up by a line from the song, "It's a game of give and take." Diana Ross's slinky whispers hanging on for the possibility of love. The broad-shouldered, stern-faced Coates is waiting on, and with a shout, working toward, justice. With the civil rights movement still before her, she's asking that old question, do the Christian God and the African-American church pacify or inspire? The gospel song is about patience weighed against activism, acceptance as opposed to all-out defiance. And the greatness of He's Right on Time is that it doesn't resolve the contradictions, but holds them on both shoulders like wings and announces that He will come. And in the meantime, justice is something we have to work toward. It's no coincidence that the golden age of gospel corresponds to the golden age of the civil rights movement. The power of the churches that produced the gospel singers and their ideas powered the movement too, uniting the Black community and reaching out beyond that community to white people of all faiths. Coates's home church is Birmingham's 16th Street Baptist, where, on a bloody Sunday 36 years ago this autumn, a bomb blew 4 little girls into bits and civil rights mythology. 16th Street Baptist was chosen for the bombing because it was a kind of ground zero for the Birmingham movement, just as the Birmingham movement was a kind of ground zero for the civil rights struggle as a whole, in Omaha Beach where the forces of the enemy finally began their retreat. Of all the musicians and singers, pop and gospel, who got involved in the movement, and there were a great many, Coates wrote the most and the best songs, and may well have sung at more civil rights meetings than anyone else. The greatest recordings of Dorothy Love Coates and the gospel harmonettes evoke the passion, conviction, fear, and sorrow of that era, and of a timeless struggle for heavenly justice here on earth. And goes on and then says, the social gospel is not only the great lost cord that knits together the New Deal and the Salvation Army, the civil rights and the anti-war movements, it also helps illuminate the full impact of gospel music on the world of rock and R&B. That impact may seem purely stylistic, but its most obvious manifestations are. Then he goes on quite a while about that. And then less often acknowledged are the other ways in which gospel has left its signature. The most crucial lies in its vision of community. In his book, A Change is Gonna Come, Craig Werner traces that gospel impulse to Bruce Springsteen's Reason to Believe, in his case most often called the power of rock and roll, and the hope of a better tomorrow that runs through the work of artists like Public Enemy, Tupac, and Wyclef Jean. This vision of social change may not be something you usually associate with gospel singers, since that style grew up in the Black Pentecostal church. Its goal of putting people in direct and ecstatic touch with God would seem to jump past the importance of change in the material world. but any study of the Black churches will show that there's a strong gospel current from Dr. Martin Luther King Sr. and the Reverend C.L. Franklin, Aretha's father, to the Reverend Jesse Jackson, from the Golden Gate Quartet to Kirk Franklin's avowedly revolutionary choir. For people ensnared first as slaves and then as sharecroppers, religion might only be able to promise salvation in the next life, but it had to offer the possibility of hope in this one too. That's why the civil rights movement had to center itself in Black churches. That's why it could.
Let's stop there. I think that's a great way to end this part of the session. Except, is Craig still here? I can't see him on the display.
He left. He lost power. He had to.
That's too bad. Because what I want to do right now is do some quick takeaways from Danny and Lauren and Daniel. I thought Craig would be a great one to lead it off because of Adam's reading that section. But Danny, Lauren, Daniel, please take us out here.
I'll start because it'll probably be the least profound. But I think I think Adam's initial question at the beginning about what we do, how we work together. I mean, so much of what we see from Dave is what Lauren described, the hard work of looking around at what's happening, journaling it, and trying to reconcile the vision and the power of the music with the realities of our lives and the possibilities for building community and the direction that community might go. And so I find one of the things I experience as I read the book is that it's terribly prescient. Almost everything seems like, oh, that's happening right now, so it doesn't feel particularly dated, even though the details may be. And but that's just a lot of good work studying the conditions that we're living in, and paying attention to the North Star, which is the music and the vision.
Cool. Lauren, how about you?
Read the book, get it at the library, get your library to buy it. It's really exciting and there's so much there. Maybe I'll say two other things. One is, and Daniel mentioned this at the beginning, Dave's also funny and mean. And we see things in this book that are both funny and mean too, in that sense that they're, it's a very sort of frank, open and honest voice, Dave is always willing to sort of say what he thinks, which sometimes can feel like, getting bonked in the head with, an eraser thrown across a classroom or something. And we shouldn't forget that voice too, the voice that's got a lot of kind of sandpaper in it. And it reflects a living, breathing human who goes too far or not far enough or screws up, and that thing is in this work too. And I hats off to Daniel and Danny for doing the work of pulling the book together and editing it and working through such a huge volume of work that I think now has a kind of narrative through it as I read it as a whole. What a gift to all of us, the work that you all put into it. Thank you for that.
Daniel.
Well, thank everybody who's here, and thank Lauren for her introduction and Danny for his editing. I want to second what she said. Adam, I co-wrote that Dorothy Love Coates piece with Dave, and I don't want you to think that it was easy. There was constant argument. He was just a son of a bitch. He wanted to get at the truth, which is a pain in the ass. And it was back and forth endlessly, as it was when I worked for then Rock and Roll Confidential. And that underlines the point Lauren makes. Dave's a great guy, and he wouldn't want to be on a pedestal. What he would say is, you like this writing? What you going to do tomorrow? What you going to organize? What you going to do? And who are you going to do it with? you know? That's, I think, where I'll leave it. That to me is what Dave Marsh continues to be about.
That's great. I think we couldn't have had four better, some of us, including Adam. Adam, do you want to tell us a little bit about the league and upcoming events?
I'm not sure I know what I'm supposed to say about upcoming events. But I also want to shout out 100,000 Poets for Change, the other sponsor of this event, along with League of Revolutionaries for a New America. We are, what that mouthful of a name tries to express: revolutionaries from all walks of life and generations, working to transform society wherever we are, through whatever positions we have in the movement, seeing all struggles over survival and culture as connected, and trying to fight for a world beyond capitalism, beyond private property as a system of oppression, and for a world where the abundance of society is shared by all. If people are interested in that, they can go to lerna.org, LRNA.org, or contact me or Lou. What upcoming events? Oh, we have that one that I was supposed to talk about. Lou, I think you should talk about it.
Well, briefly, we have we've had cultural conferences the last couple of years. So people on this Zoom should be especially interested in that opportunity for cultural visionaries to come together and talk about what is the situation we face, and what Daniel's last words were. What are we going to do? What are we going to do together? And so that'll be November 11th. When you get the summary of the chat in your next email, you'll have a link to that. We encourage everyone here to register for that. I think it's up your alley, so to speak. That's really all I want to say about that at this point. What we're going to do now is go to a closeout of music, which is, not surprisingly, it's going to be Kick Out the Jams.
Brothers and sisters, I want to see a hand out there. Let me see a hand. I want everybody to kick up some noise. I want to hear some revolution out there, brothers. I want to hear a little revolution. Brothers and sisters, the time has come for each and every one of you to decide whether you are going to be the problem or whether you are going to be the solution. That's right. You must choose, brothers. You must choose. It takes 5 seconds. 5 seconds of decision. 5 seconds to realize your purpose here on the planet. It takes 5 seconds to realize that it's time to move. It's time to get down with it. Brothers, it's time to testify, and I want to know, are you ready to testify? Are you ready? I give you a testimony. Kick out the jams, motherfucker! Yeah!